You're watching Reality Check. The Congress today broke new ground for a national political party, not in advancing the cause of internal democracy or of shaking off the mantle of dynastic control, but of hosting arguably the longest virtual political confabulation since the pandemic hit India. A nearly 7-hour marathon Congress working committee meet on the online chat platform Cisco WebEx raised expectations that India's grand old party was finally going to take on board some of the alarm bells sounded by a clutch of its leaders on the urgent need to check the leadership drift. But the outcome, Sonia Gandhi will stay on as interim president, was so predictable that it seemed almost redundant that we have to debate it tonight. But debate it we must. Essentially, the dissenters were targeted at this marathon 7-hour meet. Don't go Sonia Gandhi and bring back Rahul slogans dominated. And after 7 hours, it remains that the baton is still with the Gandhi Parivar. Sonia Gandhi offered to resign, but the loyalists insisted that she stays. Even the quote-unquote letter bomb writers had to end up singing praises of the Gandhis. Let me start with Ashwini Kumar of the Congress party first, and we have V. Sanghvi as well, but I'll start with Ashwini Kumar. Ashwini Kumar, I want to start with you on a different note, that given the manner in which these, quote-unquote dissenting letter writers were attacked at the Congress meeting, is there anything that you found in the letter which merited such an attack?
These are all subjective interpretations of what has been stated. The fact is that there is absolutely no questioning the intent of the letter, and the intent of the letter was that the leadership structure in the Congress has to be revamped from the top to the bottom. Now, the top to the bottom included the Congress president, and considering the kind of appeal she has within the Congress party, considering her stature, considering her absolutely astounding leadership for the last 15 years to the Congress party, at least we had 2 governments during her presidentship. It didn't go well with a large number of people. And I think sometimes, as I say in court, a great point in law can be lost in a bad case on facts. So it is not only necessary to say the right thing, but to say it in the right manner. So somewhere the articulation and the timing of the letter was hurtful. That is how it was perceived and found to be by many, many senior Congress persons, and that is why certain reactions came the way they did. But my view is that now we should all work together to strengthen the party.
But the fact that you actually have Rahul Gandhi himself attacking the letter writers, saying that the letter was written when my mother was unwell, saying for whom was this done, indicating or hinting at the fact that this is going to end up helping the BJP. It's one thing to outsource these kind of attacks. That does happen at these Congress gatherings. But for him to do it himself, isn't that unseemly?
First of all, I would not like to get into the mental processes of anyone of why what was said by that person, least of all what was said by Mr. Rahul Gandhi. But please do not forget that Mr. Rahul Gandhi, apart from being a former president of the Congress party and one of its future leaders, is also a son to a mother. He was bound to feel hurt when his mother was lying unwell in a hospital. Those people who were supposed to be at the top of the echelons of the Congress party chose to find that the right time to write a letter that directly questioned her leadership or the style of functioning. So he was hurt, and I can understand that.
But I just want to say that I did speak to Ghulam Nabi Azad just before I went on air, and he clarified that actually he waited till she returned from hospital and he sent the letter, and this after checking with her private secretary, who said that this was a routine visit and it was okay for him to send the letter, and that's why he sent it. And she called him back and said, I couldn't address your letter because I was unwell. He said, that's absolutely fine. Your health is paramount. Anyway, let's leave that aside. I just want to ask you though, Ashwini Kumar, that overall, stepping away from the granularity of what happened in this meeting, isn't this just a great opportunity lost for the Congress? Imagine a young voter looking at today's news coming out, the headlines, that at the end of the day, here was a chance to take on board what is broadly legitimate criticism. No one will argue with the fact that the Congress is adrift and whatnot. And instead, you just have this reaffirming of faith of the Gandhis, Sonia Gandhi once again as interim president? I mean, this is the song we've heard again and again.
Vasu, I've been saying it from day one on your show as well, that this is not the time to rake up an issue that is bound to be divisive, that is bound to create schisms within the party, and that is actually what has happened. I wish the timing was right. I wish the senior leaders had waited till Mrs. Gandhi was entirely well, gone to her or spoken to her on the telephone, individually or collectively, not have this letter come in the public domain.
But isn't this...
And everybody is trying to interpret the letter in their own way. So I think somewhere, it's not a question of missed opportunity. Please remember, what is our principal objective today? The principal objective of the Congress party, which is facing a great challenge in the history of its existence, is to remain united and not to do something that would break its cohesiveness and thereby debilitate it further.
Okay.
So this is a priority. And the Gandhi family has always been a unifying factor in the Congress party.
But at the moment, and this is my last question to you, when you say this is not the time, some would argue perhaps this is the time when the Congress is losing leaders, is seeing state government slip out of its grasp. But isn't the clear subtext of this letter that the Gandhi family, essentially, when one looks at it, it has now become more about Rahul Gandhi, that Sonia Gandhi has made it clear she doesn't want to continue as president. The problem appears to be that Rahul Gandhi also says he's reluctant, but has been backseat driving the Congress for all these months. He's intervening in every major political play, from Rajasthan to Maharashtra and so on. That's the problem.
Well, this is an inference that people have drawn. I am told that he refuses to take any decisions directly concerning the organization.
Right.
Now, who can clarify this position other than Mr. Rahul Gandhi? And don't forget that Mr. Rahul Gandhi is a former president of the Congress party. He's a member of the working committee. He's a member of parliament. He's not an ordinary Congress worker. And assuming he were to give his views, even assuming that he felt strongly about a particular thing, he can do that.
Okay,
I mean, that's for him to clarify. But I can tell you that it is within his right and within his remit to give suggestions as a former Congress president. And as probably the future Congress president.
Okay, well, he had 7 hours today to clarify. He didn't, which itself is interesting. But Ashwini Kumar, I wish we could keep you on for the panel, but thank you. But we're doing one-to-one with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Very kind.
V. Sangvi is with us, Aarti Jairat as well. Sanjay Jha is with us, former Congress spokesperson. Rashid Kedwai is senior journalist who's been reporting on the Congress for years. V. Sangvi, I was saying this earlier today that I don't envy either those who participated or those who had to moderate this 7 to 8 hour, whatever Zoom Cisco call that dragged on almost interminably. But Veer, were you at all surprised at the outcome?
No, actually, I mean, I differ from most people in that I believe the letter writers actually got what they wanted. You've had a situation where Rahul Gandhi has stepped down, has said he doesn't want to be Congress president. Nobody from his family should be Congress president. His very reluctant mother is drafted to try and run the show for a few months or for a year. And then nothing happens. No elections are called. The party drifts from one crisis to another, rudderless. Rahul Gandhi decides he's going to run the party, as you said, from the back seat and go on to a second career, trying to compete with you perhaps as a television host. And nobody actually knows what is happening. The advantage of the letter and the response it's had is at least people in the Congress are talking about it. They seem to have reached a decision today in the CWC that there will be an AICC session, that there will be an election, that there will be a new Congress president. They've used that strange Congress speak of the CWC authorizing the Congress president to appoint new people. So I imagine that there may be vice presidents or senior people appointed to do something under Sonia Gandhi.
Sure.
And I think when that election does happen, which it will, I imagine over the next 6 months, Rahul Gandhi will be persuaded, poor fellow, to again stand for president, and at least some order will be restored.
But do you think that that really solves the Congress's crisis, given that Rahul Gandhi, even when he was hands-on, didn't necessarily take the the party to the, to any
Yeah,
higher point of glory?
I take that point. But I mean, there are two crises in the Congress. The crisis one is the crisis of Rahul Gandhi. He's now led the party to two electoral humiliations. He doesn't seem to think that he did anything wrong in either of those elections. He blames the last defeat on congressmen not joining him in his personal attacks on the prime minister. So therefore, there's no sense of self-knowledge, no sense of introspection. He's going to continue doing the same thing again and again. Will that work? Well, if Mr. Modi's popularity collapses, yes. Otherwise, no. So that's crisis one. Crisis two is that Rahul Gandhi is now surrounded by a new generation of people who seem to have very little respect or regard for older generation, or even Shashi Tharoor is not really old, even a middle generation of congressmen. Those congressmen are beginning to wonder, A, does this party have any future under Rahul Gandhi? And B, even if it is going somewhere, do I fit into this? They don't have access to Rahul Gandhi. Rahul Gandhi's new coterie is arrogant, seems to act like they run everything. Sure. These guys are the past. So that second problem, the problem where congressmen fit in this new scheme of things, maybe at least partially solved. The Congress is taking note of the fact they're not going to sit down and take this lying down.
Okay. Sanjay Shah, it's interesting what we said, because actually when I spoke to Ghulam Nabi Azad, he did say that he was quite satisfied with the outcome for the reasons that we enunciated, that at least now there will be no ad hocism, there will be this AICC, there will be a full-time president, someone who's sitting in office, not some kind of ad hoc figure. But, Sanjay Jha, the point is, if that person ends up being Rahul Gandhi, that is precisely the problem that all of you have grappled with, that even when he is full-time, he's not. He is still ad hoc. He's still in and out. He's not sitting there all the time. And so then you're back to square one.
Well, Vasu, if you look at the letter articulated by the 23 politically very, I would say, discerning personalities of the Congress party, they focused on the issues that the Congress party needs to address. They have actually depersonalized it from the usual obsession with personality politics.
But how can you really in politics?
Let me address that. See, the fundamental point is that Mr. Rahul Gandhi has said that he does not want to be the Congress president. And as Veer correctly pointed out, he has repeated it that he would not like a member of the Gandhi family to take over either. A point that even Priyanka Gandhi Vadra made a year ago, which has recently been in public consumption.
But can I just jump in to say, one thing though? When you say that, we're assuming that he still stands by that. Because remember, today he had 7 hours to clarify whether he wants to or not. Even when there were these bring back Rahul slogans going on, he didn't say, I don't want to come back, which many who both attended the meeting and political observers are seeing as significant. What if maybe he wants to come back?
Well, honestly, as if you have heard all the leaders in the past, if he wanted to come back, he probably would have done so some time ago. Now, if assuming that you are right and he decides to contest the election, frankly, he's got the fundamental right to do so. I don't think anybody in the Congress party is saying that Mr. Gandhi does not have a right to contest an election.
Yes.
But what we are talking about is the Congress party needs to get transparent once and for all. You know, we have become so opaque, Vasu, that once upon a time, the Congress party used to have elections not just for the CWC and the Congress president, but for the Congress parliamentary party and even the Central Election Committee. All these have become, at the moment, nominated positions. No, so let me make one quick point before you move on.
But I just want to ask you a direct question before I move on. I want to ask you a direct question because I want to go away from the procedural thicket to the bigger question. If Rahul Gandhi decides to contest, will when I say your group, I mean this group of dissenters or whatever with whom you're closely aligned, will they contest him?
Well, it's not a question of they or one individual. Everyone in the Congress party who believes, who qualifies by the minimum standards, will have the right to contest an election. Please remember that after 1977, after 1977, when Mrs. Indira Gandhi lost, you had 4 or 5 leaders who contested for the Congress president's role. And that is the kind of vibrancy that the Congress party needs to restore within. I want to make one point before you move on. There are people, Vasu, who have today gone publicly from the Congress party, like Kumari Selja, who has used very inappropriate terms to attack the 23 signatories by calling them BJP agents. But I challenge anybody who today is calling the pro-changers as anti-Congress and pro-BJP sympathizers.
Yes.
Can anybody tell us that is there any point that they have articulated which is wrong and which is not in the interest of the Congress party? That is the fundamental quintessential issue that we need to focus on.
Aarti, Rahul Gandhi's silence, possible that he still thinks that he is a contender, but do you think it's at all possible that if this AICC happens somewhere down the line, that he will be challenged? Someone will stand up and challenge him? Or is
I doubt it.
Just
I doubt it.
Highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely. If you remember, Jitin Prasad tried to challenge Sonia Gandhi and had to eat crow because she won. I don't know how many votes Jitin Prasad got. Maybe not. Jitendra Prasad. This is Jitin's father.
Yes.
So I doubt if anybody is going to, challenge Rahul. But Basu, I'd like to draw your attention to a couple of points. One is the very strong language that was used in the resolution against the letter writers. Virtually telling them that they had no business to write this letter, that they have created divisions in the party, and this is not the time to raise these issues. That's more or less like saying you're anti-party, right? The second is the reiteration of faith in the Gandhis. And virtually saying that there are only two people who are fighting Modi and the BJP today.
Sure.
One is Sonia Gandhi and the other is Rahul Gandhi. Meaning nobody else in the Congress is fighting the BJP and Modi. These are the only two who are fighting. So you have, elevated the Gandhis to this pedestal.
Yes.
And, who's going to touch them? Who's going to challenge them? And I do feel, although Sonia Gandhi said that, I'm hurt, but gone is gone, we'll move on, these are all my colleagues. I do feel that they will, judging by the harsh tone of that CWC resolution, I think some people will have to pay the price for raising their voice, through this letter.
Interesting. You think they could throw some of them under the bus. They don't seem to feel that right now, but that could still happen. Rashid Kidwai, to that point about the idea that it is only Rahul who's fighting the forces of fascism and so on, I think we wrote a column just now where he said that sounds very much like the rhetoric that one heard around Sanjay Gandhi, where no one else is really fighting the opposition, no one else is really taking on the system, it is only one person. Those are worrying signs, if at all you see it that way, as to what happened in the past. Are you seeing shades of that now?
Well, it's always been a personality driven. Way back in 1951-52 first election, the slogan was a vote for Nehru is a vote for Congress, not the other way around. It was always known as Indira Congress. So that doesn't surprise me at all. What I feel is the key takeaway is that the dissenters have lost battle. It's been a huge setback. As Mr. V. Sangvi was saying, this promise of election is a huge kind of concession, and this will give a 1 month's time or 6 months time. And, the dissenters will have to decide who will take on Rahul Gandhi. As Aarti pointed out, you see the contest, Sitaram Kesari versus Sharad Pawar, it was always one-sided. So this is a problem. Now the dissenters cannot even move forward because the process of election has started. They were hoping that if there is any action, then they will go to court and, try to earn some reprieve. I think if I am Ghulam Nabi Azad, I'd be a very worried man today because from now onwards, the next 6 months are going to be very bleak for these 23 people.
But, you said there were two problems surrounding Rahul Gandhi. I would point to a third, which is not really Rahul Gandhi specific, but something that we don't talk about enough, which is that there's this constant obsession with who will lead the Congress. I think the Congress faces a bigger problem, that regardless of who leads it, the Congress simply doesn't know how to fight and win elections. In the modern method, in the political sort of architecture that has been created by the Modi, Amit Shah, BJP, they've created a modern political machine, and it's a whole game that you have to play. The way you do your booths, the way you manage your publicity, all of that. Some parties get it, like Aam Aadmi Party. Kejriwal gets it. Mamata Banerjee is trying to play that game. You see parties who play that game are able to fight and resist the BJP. The Congress simply doesn't know how to fight that game. So regardless of who takes over, they'll still be saddled with that problem.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Vasu. And it goes, in fact, even before that. Something like 3 years before Mr. Modi took over during UPA 2, I think the BJP hit on a formula, which was that they were going to use social media to portray Rahul Gandhi as a pappu, as a buffoon. And they've kept at that relentlessly, month after month, day after day. And the Congress has been able to do nothing about it. Every time Rahul Gandhi says something, he always has to fight the baggage of people's impression of him as an entitled idiot, as a fool, as a man who doesn't know what he's talking about.
Right.
In fact, Rahul Gandhi is actually a very well-read and intelligent man. But no, when you say this to people, people laugh at you because that image has been created with such skill. Similarly, when it comes to fighting elections, we know what booth management is like. We know what the Panna Pramukhs of Mr. Amit Shah are like. Everybody writes articles about it. But clearly, nobody in the Congress reads those articles, reads those books, or even if they do, know exactly how to fight an election this way. The kind of elections that Sonia Gandhi fought and won are very different from the elections that Mr. Modi fights, and I don't think they get it.
Sanjay, isn't that a problem for you that, you've raised many issues in this letter and some would argue that those are pertinent issues. But even the leaders who are signatories to that letter, even assuming that there's a fantasy scenario where the power or control of the party is transferred to the hands of those or a non-Gandhi, it's just that you guys don't know how to fight an election in the way that it's being fought today. How are you going to get around that?
Vasu, actually, if you look at the signatories to the letter, and there are 300 more people who have, and I'm sure there are many others who have not expressed themselves, but I'm sure will do so in the coming time. The Congress party has very discerning, perceptive, intelligent people who are good at political communication, strategy, and tactics. I know many of them personally. The problem is in our decision-making apparatus, it works with just a few people taking the call. For example, I'll give you one example. In the 2014 elections, I used to see in Breach Candy, Mumbai, a very affluent South Mumbai, Tony part of town, ads of Manrega and Food Security Act. I mean, clearly, people don't understand how you market yourself. So I think there are challenges within. Nobody can deny that. I think the key issue is that, as you rightly asked, I think Veed earlier, the only way the Congress party can really bring about a turnaround is when you have the confidence to beat Mr. Modi and Shah and win elections.
But that's...
we keep saying it's a battle of ideology, or ideology will only sell when you're in power. Otherwise, you're not being heard by anybody.
No, but the thing is, but that's the thing, Aarti, that, when the Congress tried to play that game, they brought on somebody like Prashant Kishore and experimented with him in Uttar Pradesh and experimented in Punjab. It just didn't work because there's just it's a somewhat outdated political apparatus, a concept of how you fight elections, how you take it to the ground, which doesn't
have any organizational muscle. They just don't have boots on the ground. I remember those elections where they tied up with Akhilesh, when we went to UP and to cover that election. People told us that they haven't seen. They said, Rahul Gandhi बहुत कोशिश कर रहा है बेचारा, but there's no follow-up. After Rahul Gandhi comes and gives a speech, no Congress worker shows up to try and galvanize votes, to try and get people together to, take them to the booth. So, if Congress workers are not going to be there and just, you're going to depend on Rahul Gandhi making some speech from a ramp, which is, 10 feet high and he can barely be seen, that's not going to work. You need people on the ground. And I think this is the big failure of the Congress party, big failure of Sonia Gandhi and of Rahul Gandhi, that they haven't developed any organization that can help the Congress to win an election.
That's, in fact, we're just heading into, now Bihar is coming up again. Nothing. There's no indication, nothing that the Congress is.
Yeah, but Vasu, I'll forgive them for Bihar. I'll forgive them Bihar and UP, where they've had a problem for many years. But what about states like Maharashtra, where they had the organization, where they were the dominant party? They've just thrown it all away in the last few years.
Sanjay, last word from you. I mean, Maharashtra is a great example. You can't go on blaming it on, of course, the leadership was adrift and all that. You have such a strong state leadership. They just sleepwalk through it.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for Pawar, I mean,
Vasu, I want to make a quick point here. What has been most distressing and disturbing for many of us in the party is that you lose 2 general elections in 6 years. And I'm telling you this, nobody can deny it. We have not had a single serious session amongst people about why we lost and what do we need to create in terms of the roadmap for the future. It's political suicide. And to answer your question, Congress party, when it loses in certain states, it just kind of vaporizes. We vanished from Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh for 15 years. Odisha, we haven't been there since 20 years. Don't forget Odisha, 20 years.
UP.
Bihar.
UP, Bihar.
Bihar. West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, 25 years.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no rational explanation for this complete enervation that happens in the party that we can't fight back.
Okay. Well, let's see how it all plays out now. But thank you all so much for joining us. We're completely out of time. Thank you so much for watching Reality Check. Goodbye. Good night.